just trying to, like, which one is to start filming?
The screen, it's like, has a little camera symbol and a red dot. Alrighty, we're filming?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Hey guys, so today we'll be discussing design from the 1930s to the 1960s. So before we jump into our period, we're going to take a step back to cover post-World War I design for some context. After World War I, there was a big push towards consumerist culture. Graphic designers focused on creating lifestyle fantasies and packaging experiences. You could also call this new attitude conspicuous consumption, as sociologist Thorstein Veblen like to describe it. So as the rise of fascism and the threat of war in Europe began, many European designers immigrated to the US, which is how lovely Art Deco came to be in the States. When artists and designers like Herbert Bayer, Mahim Fahmy Agha, and Alexei Brodovich came to the States, publishers and executives were eager to lock them down to capture the sophistication of European style. So now, getting into the meat of our period. In the 1920s and 30s, lots of American imagery was still rendered by hand. Poster production declined, but billboards became an entirely new, exciting medium. It was also called outdoor advertising. So billboards were often designed with simple shapes and flat colors as they were hand-painted. In Europe, the Bauhaus provided the framework for design instruction. But as people like Joseph Albers, Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, Gregory Kepps, and Herbert Bayer left and immigrated to America, they brought over concepts of thought from the Bauhaus to create the new Bauhaus in Chicago in 1937. And it was later called the School of Design. So their teachings focused on thinking beyond conventional ideas with a goal to expand the profession and help students think outside of the standard design box. The Art Directors Club was founded in 1920 to annually recognize outstanding design in things like direct mail, packaging, advertising, and point-of-purchase display. The American Marketing Association was established in 1931, showing our increased professional recognition. And then behind the scenes, the specialization of tasks generated new roles and skills and demanded more organized networks of interdependent practitioners. The graphic designer of the era no longer worked alone, but was rather placed into teams assembled by ad agencies. So this era also saw the shift between simply advertising goods to creating an identity for their clients. Companies began to create trademarks and brand identities and campaigns to distinguish themselves from others. But then there's the big question. How did they do it? Graphic design tools in the 30s included things like scissors, tape, gum, textures, gouache, pens, and other physical mediums. Designers also began playing with photography, and specifically the use of photolithographic methods to create color separations, spot colors, metallic inks, and varnishes. The ability to seamlessly integrate photography and text embodied a visual rhetoric of easy consumability. Altering artwork became readily possible. Photo montages were all the rage in avant-garde circles. The airbrush became less about removing blemishes and adopted to provide a machine-like finish that proclaimed modernity. There was four-color photographic separations and offset lithography, just so many new tools. Now, what about type? Display types for advertising and commercial use centered around geometric designs and streamlined shapes. For book publication, monotype casting was the most practical. The American Type Founders Company consolidated many independent foundries and began marketing type in coordinated families. In 1932, Stanley Morrison designed Times New Roman, plenty of times, might have heard of it. This set a benchmark for robust versatility and legibility in text spaces. Paul Renner's Futura and Rudolf Koff's Cable became popular choices for the variety in weights as well. Now, we're shifting towards a new period, the World War II and Depression era, which is characterized by public interest campaigns and information design. Now, national mobilization during World War II depended heavily on effective communication. There was a focus on patriotic posters, information graphics, and photo essays. Objectivity was prized over aesthetics. Now, even when these designs seemed extremely objective, they actually contained subtle biases and attitudes towards things like family, social identity, age, class, and other demographic categories. Now, unlike the post-World War I consumerist world, can't speak, let's try that again. Unlike the post-World War I consumerist world that encouraged the consumption of new products for personal distinction and gratification, these advertisements attempted to regulate individual behavior by promoting these social norms as common sense. This time we're at a delicate line between informing the public and prescribing conformity. So from 1936 to 1943, a program sponsored by the US government brought graphic design into a new relation with the public. The Works Progress Administration, or WPA, sponsored by Franklin D. Roosevelt, produced over 3,000 posters in shops around the country. And WPA's aim was to provide employment, but the program was also premised on the conviction that art should enter the daily lives of all Americans. Thousands of artists, designers, photographers, and writers earned a weekly salary of $25 to $35 working for the WPA. Now, many of the WPA posters were produced by hand and later produced through silkscreen printing. These posters introduced varied audiences with contemporary art, introducing them to abstraction, surrealism, and stylized approaches to form. Some figurative, realistic, and photographic compositions were made, but silkscreen printing was much faster and cheaper than the alternative. The New Deal, the recovery program that created the WPA, established the Farm Security Administration, which commissioned journalists and photographers to document the lives of America's rural poor. These photographs promoted images of American grit in the face of extreme difficulties. Documentary photography served the public interest by seeming to report directly without any bias. Now, of course, we know that design always has an agenda and an opinion, but this was a near medium and a hectic time. The camera began to be seen as a tool for empirical observation, which gave rise to photojournalism as a profession. Photography now entirely replaced illustrations when it came to journalistic purposes. In the 40s, the British publication Picture Post, which was similar to the American periodical Life, built its reputation on photojournalistic reporting. Many documentary photographers also worked for fashion magazines, because bills. Cameras became portable, film stock varied, and now graphic designers' skills were expanded by an industry whose products ranged applied to amateur, professional, and technically specialized markets. When the US entered World War II in 1941, WPA was mostly gone, save for the few members who worked on defense-related campaigns for the Office of Administration. Now, the US wasn't the only place that graphic designers worked for their government. And in fact, the Soviet Union had artists as state workers since 1917, which is way before the WPA. Soviet designers developed a modern montage-based informational poster style. They wanted to promote the Soviet state as a functional machine in which each person's contribution was essential to the well-being of the collective. But as the totalitarianism of Joseph Stalin's regime took repressive form in the 30s, the iconography of the Soviet Union graphics dramatically changed. Instead of each person's importance to the general whole, masses of individuals were just absorbed into the social body. This poster style was then echoed in many types of wartime propaganda, like the Nazi Party in Germany, and Mussolini in Italy, and Franco's military regime in Spain. Many illustration styles fostered sudden cultural ideas through depictions of individuals enhanced by certain traits, like the blonde, muscled German. Now, national stereotypes, in the US as well, emerged from designers' efforts to create imagery that reached its target audience through details of style and form. Now, new information technologies were on the horizon in the 50s. As war technologies got better, things like radar, sonar, and other imaging technologies for defense and combat, it needed a display system for more effective communication. Now, this innovation was the very beginning of digital interface and information design, or UI/UX design, which we do today. In the late 40s to early 50s, the first electronic computers furthered this movement. In their start, computers served to process and visualize huge amounts of data through things like grids, bar graphs, pie charts, and others. Graphic design was able to take the intangible data, like money flow or heat transfers, and give it a visual form, which is just an incredible concept that wasn't seen before. In the 50s, companies began expanding into corporations, which required design to create a unified image with a distinct logo and corporate identity system. Slogans, logo types, color schemes, signature typography, and other compact messages made a corporation seem like an individual entity with a voice and personality, giving an added value to its products. But this need for an organized identity wasn't solely for private corporations. Public entities like railways and postal systems also benefited from the graphic designer's ability to create and maintain style conformity. But this was a huge challenge for designers, especially when their clients had scattered offices with different teams of designers in each one. So because of this, their stylistic guidelines for these companies need to be specific enough to control consistency while allowing designers necessary flexibility to work in various contexts. A need for immediate recognition also brought designers to start thinking about universal symbols that would surpass cultural and linguistic boundaries. Ultimately, these universal signs succeeded by becoming just familiar conventions rather than any inherent immediate legibility. Now, the international typographic style, which is also called the Swiss style, had clean, neutral forms that served many vistas because of its straightforward, objective nature. It had an underlined grid system with geometric forms, asymmetrical layouts, and sans serif type. There was an almost total absence of decoration or illustrations. The clean, unfuzzy directness was the primary aim of this approach. Now, one of the most powerful forces for dissemination of this approach came through the institutionalization in design schools. Another major reason for dissemination in the 50s and 60s was through publications that embodied the aesthetic they promoted. Now, one was the Zurich-based publication New Grafik, which immediately reminded me of a specific temporary brand identity, IKEA. Now, the similarities in type design and sometimes layout are astonishingly similar, showing its clear influence in the design of our world today. Also in the 50s and 60s, American television boomed. New markets in the film industry and commercials with animation opened up. Graphic designers' jobs shifted from static images to complex challenges of motion graphics. They took on sequence, engaging movement, and timing as compositional features of design. Elements like transfer type and screen patterns appeared. Experimentation with typesetting was difficult in the beginnings because of the high expense of resetting. So phototype gave graphic designers a new freedom using film strips and strobe lamps because it was way lower cost and more flexible than metal type. Type can now be cut, pasted, overlapped with images, and even rephotographed. The old rigidity of text blocks began to break down as more graphic design work involved film and copy camera manipulations. That's lots of changes from the 30s to 60s. During this time, graphic design was influenced by innovation and reacted by innovating itself. Graphic design was no longer an isolated career, but it was replaced by teams run by art directors, which is a concept that still persists today. World War II propaganda promoted very specific ideals on how individuals should act and think, causing a lot of stereotypes and discrimination to circulate, especially when these designs were seen as objective truth, like with photography. Innovations in technology sparked designers to think about UI/UX design. A need for universal language emerged through symbols and clean type. Television was on the rise and brought a whole new slew of things for graphic designers to deal with. And that's about it. There's just a ton of information, so good luck. Bye.